My daughter-in-law threw water in my face at Christmas dinner. One quiet move changed everything. She looked me dead in the eye, picked up her glass of ice water, and threw it in my face in front of my entire family on Christmas Eve. The room went silent. My grandchildren stared. My own son didn't say a word. And in that moment, dripping wet at 75 years old, sitting at the head of a table in a house I paid for, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to smile, wipe my face with my napkin, and start making some very quiet phone calls. By New Year's Day, she wouldn't have a roof over her head, a car in the driveway, or a single thing that had my name attached to it. And there were a lot of things that had my name attached to it. If you want to see exactly how a 75-year-old grandmother took back everything without ever raising her voice, stay with me to the end, because the quiet moves are always the ones that hurt the most. Before I go any further, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, please hit that like button and subscribe. It truly helps this channel more than you know. And I'd love to know, where are you watching this from tonight? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Amanda. I'm 75 years old, and I've spent most of my life being the person who smooths things over. The peacemaker. The one who bites her tongue at Thanksgiving, who writes the check when someone's short on rent, who shows up early to help set the table and stays late to help clean it. I raised one son, mostly on my own after my husband passed when the boy was only 14. I worked 2 jobs for years so he could go to college without drowning in debt. When he got married 8 years ago, I cried tears of joy at that wedding. I thought I was gaining a daughter. I was wrong. What I gained was a woman who saw me from day one as an obstacle. Not a mother-in-law. An obstacle. Something standing between her and the things she wanted. And chief among those things was my house. Let me back up. After my husband died, I sold our old place and bought a modest but comfortable 4-bedroom home in a good neighborhood. Paid it off in full about 6 years ago. It's not a mansion, but it's mine, free and clear, no mortgage, no liens, nothing. When my son and his wife were struggling to find something they could afford after their lease ended, I did what I thought any decent mother would do. I told them they could move in with me temporarily, while they saved up for a down payment. I even fixed up the basement into a private little apartment for them, put in a separate entrance, a kitchenette, the works. I paid for all of it out of my retirement savings because I wanted them to be comfortable. That was 3 years ago. They never left. First it was fine. Then it became less fine. My daughter-in-law started treating the house like it was hers. She'd rearrange my kitchen. She'd tell my guests in my living room about our house and when we redo the front porch. She stopped asking if she could use my car, and just started taking the keys off the hook whenever she pleased. Small things at first. The kind of things you let slide because you don't want to start a war over a coffee mug or a parking spot. But it kept growing. She began inviting her own friends over without asking. Loud gatherings on weeknights. I'd come downstairs to make my evening tea and find 6 strangers in my living room, my son nowhere to be seen, off at work or hiding, and her holding court like she owned the place. When I gently mentioned that I'd appreciate a little notice before hosting parties, she rolled her eyes at me. In my own kitchen. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself young couples go through stress, that she was probably overwhelmed, that maybe if I gave it more time, more grace, things would settle. I am by nature a patient woman. 75 years on this earth teaches you that most storms pass if you just wait them out. This storm didn't pass. It got worse. About a year ago, she started pushing my son to have me sign the house over to them. Not buy it. Sign it over. Their reasoning, as she explained it to me over dinner one night with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, was that it would simplify things for estate planning and that since they were already living here anyway, it just made sense for the house to be in their name. I said no. Politely but firmly I said no. This was my retirement security. My husband and I worked our whole lives for this. I wasn't about to hand over the deed to a woman who couldn't be bothered to ask before rearranging my spice rack. She did not take the no well. After that conversation, the little digs became constant. She'd make comments about how I was getting older and might need help managing things soon. She'd talk about assisted living facilities within earshot of me, like she was casually planting seeds. She started referring to my bedroom, the primary bedroom on the main floor, as the room she and my son would eventually take over once I was more comfortable upstairs. I have a bad hip. Upstairs was never going to be comfortable for me, And she knew it. I want to be clear about something. I am not a pushover and I am not naive. I let this go on as long as I did because my son was caught in the middle, and I loved him too much to force him to choose between his wife and his mother. I kept hoping he'd wake up and see what was happening under his own roof, my roof technically. He didn't. Or maybe he did and simply lacked the spine to do anything about it. Either way, I bided my time. And while I bided my time, I did something my daughter-in-law never once considered I was capable of doing. I paid very, very close attention. I noticed which bills she asked me to help out with that were quietly never paid back. I noticed the car in my driveway that I had co-signed for 2 years earlier so she could get a lower interest rate, a car that was still legally half in my name because she'd never refinanced it into her name alone like she promised. I noticed the basement apartment I built for them was never once contributed to, not a dime of rent, not a utility bill, nothing for 3 years. I noticed she had quietly used my address and my good credit history to open 2 store credit cards I only found out about because a statement slipped through the mail one afternoon while she was out. I kept records. I kept receipts. I kept copies of everything. A lifetime of being underestimated teaches you to build a very quiet, very thorough paper trail. Then came Christmas Eve. We'd all gathered at the house, my son, my daughter-in-law, their 2 children, my sister who'd driven in from out of state, and a few close family friends. I had spent 2 days cooking. My hip was aching from standing at the stove, but I wanted it to be a good night. I wanted foolishly perhaps for it to feel like a real family Christmas. Dinner had barely started when my daughter-in-law brought up, out of nowhere, in front of everyone, that she and my son had been talking to a lawyer about my capacity to keep managing the house on my own. She said it casually like she was discussing the weather, while passing the mashed potatoes. My sister's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My son stared at his plate like it had suddenly become the most interesting object in the world. I asked her calmly to please not discuss family business like that at the dinner table, especially not in front of the children. That was when she stood up, said I had no right to tell her what she could and couldn't say in her own home, and threw her glass of ice water directly in my face. The table went dead silent. Water dripped off my chin onto my good Christmas sweater. My youngest grandchild started crying. My son said nothing. Not a word in my defense. Just sat there. I picked up my napkin. I wiped my face. And I smiled. I want you to understand something about that smile. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't defeat. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed, in front of 5 witnesses including her own sister-in-law, absolute and undeniable proof of exactly who she was dealing with. Every bit of doubt I'd had about what I was about to do evaporated with that ice water. I said quite calmly that dinner was over, that everyone was welcome to take a plate home, and that I needed some air. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and I did not cry. I got out a notebook I had kept hidden in my nightstand for the better part of a year, and I started making a list. The next morning, Christmas Day, while the house was still quiet and everyone was nursing the awkward hangover of the night before, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia who had handled my husband's estate years ago, and who I trusted completely. I told her everything. The living arrangement, the unpaid basement rent for 3 years, the car loan, the credit cards opened in my name without full authorization, the pressure to sign over the deed. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said one sentence that I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, "Amanda, you have been remarkably patient, and now it is time to be remarkably efficient." The second call was to my bank, to freeze and monitor any activity connected to accounts linked to my address and social security number, and to begin the process of formally disputing the credit cards that had been opened without my full consent. The third call was to the DMV and my insurance company, to begin the process of removing my name from that car loan and transferring full financial responsibility, meaning full ownership and full liability, to my daughter-in-law alone. If she wanted to be the type of woman who threw water in her mother-in-law's face, she could be that woman with her own full car payment too. Patricia drew up a formal 30-day notice to vacate for my son and daughter-in-law. Because they had never signed a lease and had never been official tenants, and because my name and my name alone was on the deed, this was entirely within my legal right. I want to be very clear for anyone watching who might be in a similar situation. This was not an eviction born of cruelty. This was a landlord, who happened to also be a mother and a grandmother, exercising her legal right over her own property after 3 years of unpaid rent, disrespect, and manipulation, capped off by an actual physical assault at her own dinner table. I delivered that notice myself in person 2 days after Christmas. I did not do it with anger. I did not raise my voice. I sat my son down alone without his wife in the room, and I told him I loved him more than anything in this world, but that I would not be disrespected in my own home for one more single day. I told him the notice was legal, it was final, and it gave them a full 30 days, more than generous, to find a new place to live. He tried to argue. He tried the old tactics that I was being dramatic, that his wife didn't mean it, that family doesn't do this to family. I let him finish, and then I asked him one simple question. I asked him where he was at that table when his wife threw water in his mother's face. He didn't have an answer, because the truth is, he'd been choosing her comfort over my dignity for a very long time, and Christmas Eve was just the night it finally became undeniable, even to him. My daughter-in-law's reaction when she found out was exactly what you'd expect. Screaming. Accusations that I was a bitter old woman trying to punish her for speaking her mind. Threats to expose me to the rest of the family as cruel and controlling. I let her scream. I had the paperwork. I had the receipts. I had 3 years of bank statements showing exactly $0 in rental contributions. I had the credit card disputes already filed. I had the DMV paperwork already in motion to make that car fully hers, and hers alone financially. Screaming doesn't move deadlines. Documentation does. Here is where the quiet part of this story becomes, I think, the most satisfying part. I did not need to fight her in public. I did not need to defend myself to extended family or post anything anywhere. I simply let the consequences of her own choices unfold, one legal, calm, well-documented step at a time. Within 2 weeks, the credit card companies had closed the fraudulently opened accounts and removed the debt from my name, shifting liability appropriately based on the paper trail Patricia and I had assembled. Within 3 weeks, the car loan had been fully transferred, meaning if she wanted to keep driving that car, the full payment, previously subsidized by my excellent credit, was now entirely hers to bear at a much higher rate reflecting her own credit history. Within 30 days, precisely as the notice stated, they moved out. My son found a small apartment across town. I helped him move his things quietly without a word of "I told you so," because that was never the point. The point was never to punish my son. The point was to stop being invisible in my own life. My daughter-in-law, I'm told, is still angry. I understand that. Consequences often look like anger from the outside, when really what they are is accountability finally arriving after a long, comfortable absence. The house is quiet now. I redid the basement apartment into a proper guest suite for when my sister visits. I have my kitchen back exactly the way I like it. I have my evenings back, my peace back, my sense of being respected in my own home back. My son and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship, on my terms this time, terms that include basic respect as a non-negotiable foundation. He visits on Sundays alone and we talk. It's not perfect, but it's honest and it's mine. I think about that Christmas Eve often, the shock of that cold water hitting my face, the silence of the table, the way my own son couldn't meet my eyes. And I think about the woman who wiped her face with a napkin and smiled instead of screaming. That smile was the moment everything changed, not because I forgave what happened, but because I finally understood that I didn't need to raise my voice to take my life back. I just needed to be as thorough and as patient in my response as I had been in my kindness for all those years prior. If there's one thing I want anyone watching this to take away, it's this. Being kind does not mean being a doormat. Being patient does not mean you have no limits. And sometimes the strongest thing an older woman can do is stay perfectly calm, gather every piece of paper she needs, and let the truth, backed by documentation and the law, do the talking for her. No shouting required. Thank you for sitting with me through this story tonight. If it meant something to you, please give this video a like, subscribe for more stories like mine, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single comment, and knowing you're out there means more to this old woman than you might think. Take care of yourselves and take care of your peace. Nobody else is going to protect it for you.